Good evening and welcome to The Right Side. My name is Chris Pareja and I'm your host this evening. And this is the show where we talk about today's news, topics, and trends from an admittedly conservative perspective. Now, we often at The Right Side talk about holding your local elected officials and your national as well as state level officials accountable. Tonight, we're very honored to have Matt Grocott, the mayor of San Carlos, joining us this evening. And we're not only going to talk to him about engaging our electeds, but we're going to talk about how to do it effectively and how to get to know what's important to your electeds, because although we are conservative and it's not necessarily as common as we'd like it to be here in the Bay Area, there are people who will agree with our sides of the issues, on at least specific issues, and if we can help them understand what's important to us and understand what's happening that's important to them, we can get a lot more done together. So Matt, thanks for joining us this evening. Welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks. Good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about, first of all, how you got involved and what made you decide that you were going to run for office in the first place.
Well, I got involved in San Carlos over a land use issue, actually. It had to do with a historical site that had been rezoned, and we were going to lose it entirely, these historic buildings that people liked, and that's what got me involved.
Okay, and then you got to a point where you just said, I'm so passionate about land use issues as a whole, or what was it? Just one issue alone isn't usually enough to make someone throw their family out into the public eye.
Yeah.
What was it that triggered it?
Well, just being involved in that, and some of it was people meeting me through that process and encouraging me to run for council. I came off as more of an independent person, and our council, just like even today and in many cities, a lot of times council members will come through some kind of process, like they will have been on the Traffic and Transportation Commission or the Planning Commission, and then they'll run for council. And so there tends to be a little bit of an insider play to getting on council. I was coming completely from the outside.
Okay. And so what did you find when you were running? Did you find that a lot of the citizens were frustrated with the way the city was moving, or did you find many of them just didn't even care?
It's interesting. When you run and you get out there and you start knocking on doors and walking around, you go up to the door and you've got your 3 points where you want to get across. And a lot of times you don't get past your name because, as you implied, people really aren't all that interested. They want to get back to their soccer game or doing things with their kids or whatever, especially on the, you tend to do a lot of walking in the evening or on the weekends. And on the weekends, there's so often people will say, what was your name again? Thanks for coming to my door. You got my vote. Right. And off you go.
Because you're the only one they've ever met.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in San Carlos, tell us how the transition went from being on just city council to the transition to mayor.
Well, most of these cities on the peninsula, up and down the peninsula, are what are called general law cities. And so being the mayor is actually, people think of it as a rock star position, and it really is not. You're one of 5 on the council. Your responsibilities as mayor are to run the meeting during, when you have your council meeting. Because of that, you meet with the city manager between meetings to go over the agenda and talk about what's coming up for the council. And, and so at the meeting, you're a traffic cop, basically, making sure that the conversation stays civil and everybody gets their turn and a chance to ask questions and so forth. And then the other aspect of being mayor is, when the chamber calls and they need the mayor, or when the Girl Scouts call, those kind of things.
When the media calls because something is blown up.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So, so talk to us a little bit about the kinds of things that we can expect. Like in this particular case, you say a lot of people don't know what's happening civically within their city and everything else, and having run for office, a lot of times people try to come to you to solve problems that you have no jurisdiction over, even as the mayor.
Yeah.
And when we've had discussions about people come to you and say, I've got a problem with this police officer or this, talk to us about how that works.
Well, as I mentioned before, we're mostly general law cities on the peninsula, and so the council, if you ever look at a flow chart or an organizational chart actually of your city, the council is, as an entity, as a five-body, or most cities are five, as a five-body, five-member body, they are the boss, if you will, of the city manager. And then everything comes underneath that, underneath the city manager. So your police chief, your fire chief, all the different department heads work for the city manager. So I've had, where citizens will come to me and say, something about the police. Can you talk to the police chief? Well, no, I can't. I can go talk to the city manager and let him know. And even as that, I'm just acting as an ombudsman, but I don't, as a sole individual, I don't have any policy pull, if you will, any more than the rest of the council. The council makes decisions as a council. And so, even like say if there's an issue, I can bring it up to the city manager. If he needs more policy direction from whatever the problem is, he'll put it on the agenda, he or she will put it on the agenda for the council to discuss and make a policy decision.
Right.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, though, because you're the first line of attack and you're most visible and you're elected, we've talked about the fact that sometimes people can be very passionate about the topic that they're coming to you to present. Now, the first order is figuring out if you have any jurisdiction over it in the first place or not. Right. But afterwards, when they figure out that it is something that you can have some sway over, what's the best way to do it? Do you prefer that people yell and scream at you and hold up signs, pitchforks? Does that work?
There's a couple of avenues. Of course, these days we have email. Most councils have a voicemail. If you go to a website, the city's website, you can find for each council member a phone number, and you can call that person and leave them a voicemail message. I mentioned email. You can sometimes catch people at events and talk to them, around town or at the grocery store. That's one of the great things actually about a city council is it's your most local, it's local. It's right there. Your official, whoever the elected official is right there. You can usually find them around town. So they're more available than, somebody you elect and send to Washington. But the approach you mentioned, we're just people like everybody else in town. So the best way to approach is like you would your neighbor or a business associate on that level.
Okay. And so how does somebody find out what's important to the individual council members and what's on their radar screen so that they know who to go to if they are trying to pursue a policy direction?
Well, different council members do have different interests, and one of the things you can do is go to the city's website, and there'll be a page on each council member, and you can find out what bodies that council member serves on. There's all these different regional boards and so forth, and to some extent we volunteer for that. That's another, actually, a duty of the mayor is to assign council members to these different boards. But most mayors don't do it heavy-handedly. There'll be a council meeting. We'll look at what all the positions are that we need people filling in on, and we'll talk about it. For instance, I serve on the County City Association of Governments has a committee called BPAC. It stands for Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Well, I've been a cyclist for years. So when that came up as an opening, I've raised my hand and said, I like cycling and I'm interested in this topic. Perhaps I could be of service on BPAC. And so I got the position on BPAC. Other council members might be interested in, regional housing issues. So they'll end up on the HART. There's a board called HART, deals with regional low-income housing production. ABAG deals with some of that. So there's all these different boards, library, JPA, and that'll give you an insight into what that council member is possibly interested in.
But it also goes to show that even though you may be focused on something very locally, they may have pull at a larger regional level in some way, shape, or form. That's right. Depending on their interests and depending on the boards that they're associated with. That's right. So sometimes you can kill multiple birds with one stone if you're trying to pursue something not only locally but also for example, if regional housing is an issue for you, or transit and transit villages, et cetera.
That's right. And some council members really go after those things. And some of the bigger boards are, like in our county, in San Mateo County, there's the SamTrans board, which deals with the bus system and so forth. There's the TA, Transit Authority. There's MTC, Metropolitan Transportation Commission, ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments.
And thank you for spelling out the acronyms for people, because they can't keep up with our scorecard.
My vice mayor right now, Bob Gracilli, that's a big thing with him. Don't use an acronym if you can't give us what it stands for.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is important. So just speaking of these regional bodies, there's a lot of concern amongst members of this audience that if these behemoths continue to grow and continue to develop their power structure, that eventually city councils, mayors, those kinds of bodies won't really have any pull anymore. Are you starting to see a trend in that direction?
Well, I am. The whole idea with state government in California is that land use decisions are made at a local level. And there's been an emerging struggle over the years where ever since, especially since Senate Bill 375 was passed, the Steinberg bill, tying and linking transportation and housing together, linking it together under the the idea was we're trying to solve global warming, and so we got to reduce people commuting and get them living where they work and so forth. And so that was the idea. Well, let's link these two things. And what that did is it gave a lot more control over these things to Metropolitan Transportation Commission and ABAG. ABAG mostly deals with the housing end of it. MTC deals with the transportation issue, but they've linked together, and so you have these bodies making decisions about about land use at the regional level, but of course it has a local impact.
Sure. For example, they're dictating housing numbers and how much low-income, mid-range income housing you have to put into your city and where.
Now, for years, that has been done. They're called RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Ever since I've been on council, I've known of these numbers coming down from ABAG. A couple things have changed over the years. One, the numbers were coming down, and some of the cities, especially the smaller cities, felt like we can't handle these numbers. And so ABAG, and this is one good thing that ABAG did, is ABAG went to the state and said, can we deal with these numbers as a region, as ABAG, and we'll dish them out to the cities who are members of our organization in San Mateo County. And the state said, yes, you can do that. And since then, other regions have done the same thing. So for us, some cities like Redwood City, South City, the bigger cities have picked up more of the numbers of housing that's being allocated, allowing cities like San Carlos and Belmont and so forth to take less. And in some places like Portola Valley, which is very rural, to take almost nothing at all.
Right.
Now, that's one thing that's changed. The other thing that's changed is when we've linked this traffic and transportation to housing, it's also linking the dollars.
Yes.
It used to be all you had to do was plan for the housing numbers. But now what's going to be happening is if you don't build it, you're not going to get your transportation funding. So now there's more teeth to the law.
So it goes from strongly suggest to now you're going to do it or you're not going to get money.
Yeah, it's almost a mandate. It's not quite there as a mandate, but right. If you want to fix your roads and you want to, put in new sidewalks and so forth and have it paid with state grant money, you're going to have to build some housing.
Right. Which is counterintuitive when you look at the fact that in many cases people are leaving California, and so we're building additional infrastructure and mandating that people spend money in hopes that people will show up, even if the trend is going in the opposite direction.
You bring up an interesting point. I've been in meetings where people have asked and challenged these numbers that are coming down because they're all based on forecasts, 15, 20, 25, 30 years out, and the trend line is based on old data about the growth of California. when you challenge it, they say, well, what we're going through now is just a blip in the road. It'll come back.
Right.
But it's been, you know, the last few years, I think in a 5-year window, something like that, we've seen decline of population in California, and as you said, people leaving the state.
Right. Right.
So,
and the businesses and everything else
that goes with it. That's right.
Are
yeah.
going.
And you know, it concerns me when I look up and down the peninsula, the El Camino transit corridor with the train and everything, and you see the housing that's getting built or is being planned all up and down the peninsula. I kind of wonder if at some point we're not going to have a glut of, I'm not going to say a glut of housing, but a glut of that kind of housing.
Right.
You know, there's a difference between the demand for single-family homes and then the demand for moderate to high-density homes, which tend to be, you know, those kind of houses tend to be people who just got married, they don't have kids, or maybe they have one kid and they don't mind living in a condo unit, or the other end of life, you know, my kids are off to college, I'm an empty nester, and you have some of those people who want to retire and stay in the area, so they'll sell their home and then move closer to, you know, a downtown, what they call walkable communities.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So are there particular initiatives that are of interest to you personally?
One of the things that I'm most interested in, but it seems like a very big, you know, monster to slay, if you will, is the whole deal with what's called pension reform. I know Pete Constant down in San Jose and his council, they've attacked this, but then they've been sued, is my understanding. The last I heard, their city's been sued for their pension reform plan. But to hear Pete talk, even what they've done is just, to some extent, tweaking around the edges. He believes it's got to be something bigger than that. We just have this huge unfunded liability as a state, as counties, as cities, that we're going to have to face up to.
Right.
And that would be something I would like to do something about, but like I say, it's such a large problem. You just kind of wonder, you know, the first bite of the elephant, isn't that the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of issues that a lot of us feel overwhelmed because there are so many things that are of interest to us. There's the pension reform, there's the high-density housing issues, and looking at cities being targeted potentially that have excessively high education scores to kind of even them out and bring in people who have lower scores to make it fair.
Right.
Redistributing education, right? And so there are those issues and just fiscal insanity at all levels. If somebody finds something, like for example, let's say they are in San Carlos and they're very concerned about pension reform as well and making sure that there's not a legacy of debt left for their kids, but a legacy of fiscal responsibility and being able to maintain the community that they live in, how can they get involved and support their local council member here, or if they want to support Pete in San Jose?
Sure. There is one very good way a person can support these kind of things, and that is is to do some research on it. When you're in the audience, if you will, as a, you know, a member of the community, and you have something you're very concerned about, if you can do some research on it and then even put something together that has all the backup material but also has sort of an executive summary, that kind of thing is very helpful to a council member. The reason being is when you're on council, you have so many things coming across your desk that, and you know, the council members in the cities up and down the peninsula, again, being these general law cities, means we don't work full time. Like Pete, for instance, Pete Constant in San Jose, who I mentioned, he does work full time. He has a staff. So if he wants to dig into something, he can give it to his staff to work on. He can work on it. You know, I design houses for a living. I have a son that, you know, we homeschool. So I've got my, you know, a lot of things that go on in life. Council's just part of it. And so digging into an issue, even things that are coming across our dais from the staff, it's sometimes really difficult to read all the material, understand it, get into it. And so when somebody comes from the outside with an issue that's not planned for the dais, if they have that researched and so forth, that's really helpful.
So being a subject matter expert in the thing you're passionate about can be very useful to persuading
that's right.
a council member to take up your cause.
That's right.
Okay.
The other thing that helps also is to persuade a council member is if it's just you, that might be one thing. If it's just you and it's about, something that has to do with your property that you want fixed or whatever, then it's okay if it's just you. But if it's just you and you're concerned about this one issue that's a big issue, like pension reform or regional housing or something, if you can show that you're part of a group or some other organization and there's other people who are like you that are concerned about this, that's going to speak, louder than just one person would, obviously. Yeah.
Great. Great. So any other issues that if you were king of the world, you would take over, at least on a local level?
Yeah, probably high-speed rail.
Moving it into or out, away?
Just not even building it, to tell you the truth. It just seems like, I just don't understand it, why we're subsidizing as taxpayers some kind of, a transportation model that competes with airlines. Meanwhile, the airlines are businesses too. Why are we creating, why are we subsidizing one and ignoring the other? It just, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, if people want to get in the fight next to you, we'll give them the opportunity now because we've got about a minute left. Can you tell us exactly how people can reach you if they wanted to learn more about how to properly persuade their council members or reach out to you because they're one of your constituents? Sure.
Well, any council member, you can go to your city's website, and usually, these days, if you type in the name of your city, but in our case, City of San Carlos, it's cityofsancarlos.org. And then you go to the website and you can look under Council, City Council tab, and you can find me there.
All right. Well, Matt, thanks for sharing a little bit of insight because we normally tell people to go torment the electeds, but we never tell them how to do it. So thanks for giving them the insight and safe travels to you, sir.
Thank you.
And at this point, what we're going to do is take a quick break and hear a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum. We'll be right back.
Say, well, I say I'm a constitutional law attorney. And they say, oh, really? What kind of constitutional law attorney? I say, well, I'm the true kind. The kind that believe that the Constitution is what the Constitution says and what it was intended to say. Anything beyond that is tyranny and should not be allowed.
So it's come to this, my friends. You ready for the second American Revolution against a ruling class that simply lectures but does not listen or defend the American people? It is government versus the people. Am I right? Yes. Look at the Electoral College example. Right? A leftist popular challenge to states' rights. You think the founders weren't brilliant people? Did they not know what they were doing by carefully calibrating to get the small states and the big states to come together? Why does Wyoming get 2 senators in California? Actually, I'd rather have Wyoming's 2 senators.
And welcome back to the right side. That was a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum. They actually hold meetings with brand name speakers the first Tuesday of every month. Tonight, they will be hosting an event at the IFES Portuguese Hall at 432 Stearland Road, about a minute and a half from here in Mountain View. And tonight's speaker is Kevin Jackson of the Black Sphere. He's written a couple of books, one, Sexy Brilliance and Political Lies, and he'll be discussing living under liberalism this evening. The March speaker panel will be a discussion on education reform and what needs to happen to build a stronger education infrastructure. And yes, even unions will be represented at that particular panel. In April, we'll be hosting Dr. David Bobb from Hillsdale College. And then in May, Bill Whittle will be speaking from PJTV, Afterburner, and similar types of shows and fame. There are other big name speakers coming in the near future. I won't get into them now, but stay tuned. They are of interest. If you need more information on the Conservative Forum, you can find it at theconservativeforum.com. And in closing, as I said this evening, we've talked often about how you can go and hold your elected officials accountable. Matt shared with us a lot of insight into ways that you can go about it. And remember that these folks are just humans too. They care about a lot of the same issues you care about. In some cases, you need to track them down. You need to figure out what's important to them and share your passion for the issues with them and see where it leads you. Not only locally, but as we discussed, they potentially could have pull that can get you the assistance you need at a larger regional level and maybe even sometimes in the state or national level, because they all do chat with one another. So on that note, get your passions out there, stay active, and we'll look forward to seeing you sometime soon, either in person or on the show. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this has been The Right Side. Have a good evening.